Hey folks, tonight we're diving into the brutal, savage, and downright terrifying world of medieval labor. Back when your job title said less about your career and more about how likely you were to catch the plague or get burned alive. So before you get comfy, take a sec to like the video and subscribe only if you actually like what I do here. No pressure. And drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from and what time it is there. It's always cool to see who's tuning in from every corner of the globe. Now, dim those lights. Maybe turn on a fan for some soothing white noise. And let's embark on tonight's adventure together. Imagine you were born in medieval England with a modest career dream. You don't want to be a bloodthirsty knight, nor a super quiet monk. So you pick the path of least resistance. You become a gong farmer, and no. In case you're wondering, gong here is not a musical instrument. It's medieval slang for human poop. A gong farmer is the lucky chap who gets to shovel it out of the privies, cesspits, latrines basically, wherever folks went after a hearty meal of turnips and regret. You work at night, not because it's mysterious, but because the townsfolk are too polite or terrified to admit you exist during the day. You show up with a shovel, a bucket, and maybe a shred of your last bit of dignity. You descend into pits, sometimes deep dumps, sometimes deeper, depending on how efficient the town is. The good news, gong farmers actually got paid well, sometimes more than carpenters or roofers. The bad news, you earned every coin while suffering centuries of community shame. In the 1300s, health and safety were not exactly top priorities. Privies could collapse. Methane could ignite. There are records of gong farmers passing out from noxious fumes, slipping into the muck, and dying in what might be the worst obituary ever written. Their tools, a wooden bucket, a long-handled shovel, and sometimes a donkey not for company, but to haul the trash out of town. The waste was dumped into designated pits or used as fertilizer because nothing says organic farming like medieval poop management, socially. Gong farmers were outcasts, not exactly party invites, but some found camaraderie among fellow poop collectors, maybe while competing over who had the worst day on the job. That smell? You never got used to it. You just stopped complaining. Eventually, it became part of your personality. Yeah, gong farmers might not have held swords or worn fancy hats, but they kept medieval cities from drowning in their own digestive disasters. They were the unsung heroes of sanitation, one bucket at a time. And if that sounds bad, don't worry, it gets worse. Suppose you're not cut out for the urban cesspit game. You want something more natural, outdoorsy, and involving wildlife. Congratulations. You just became a leech collector. Proud medieval pros who spent their days wading through swamps to gather nature's tiny vampire squad. Job description: simple step into the pond, stand still, and let leeches latch onto your bare feet. That's it. You're the bait. You lure them in with warm blood, bad life choices, and your resigned expression. When those slimy suckers attach, you pull them off and drop them into a jar. Repeat until you pass out from blood loss. Then go home, sleep it off, and maybe develop an infection. It's not a trivial gig. Leeches were in high demand thanks to medieval medicine's favorite cure-all: bloodletting. Headache, suck it out. Sadness, let us drain some of your joy. Plague, sure, just a little less blood. Please. Barber surgeons loved leeches, like modern influencers love ring lights. They were essential, which meant someone had to collect thousands of the little guys, swinging swords or rocking fancy hats. These guys kept medieval cities from drowning in their own digestive leftovers. They were the unsung heroes of sanitation, lugging buckets around. And if that sounds bad, don't worry. It gets worse. Say you're not into urban garbage piles. You want something more natural, outdoorsy, and involving wildlife. Congrats. You just became a leech collector. Proud medieval pros who spent their days wading through marshes to gather nature's tiny vampire critters. The job's simple. Step into a pond, stand still, and let leeches latch onto your bare feet. That's it. You're the bait. You lure them in with warm blood, bad life choices, and a face that screams resignation. When those slimy suckers cling on, you pull them off and drop them in a jar. Repeat until you're about to pass out from blood loss. Then go home to sleep it off and maybe get an infection. Not exactly a glamorous gig. Leeches were in high demand thanks to medieval medicine's favorite cure: bleeding people out. Got a headache? Suck it up. Feeling down? Let us drain your joy. Plague? Sure, you probably just need a little less blood. Barber surgeons loved leeches, like modern influencers love ring lights. They were essential, which means someone had to collect thousands of them. Step right up. Marsh's mobile floorboards. Protective gear? Not really. Most collectors worked barefoot and shoeless. Usually women or the seriously poor. The lucky ones got skirts. The unlucky got scars. And if you're really unlucky, you went home with leeches still clinging and growing smugly under your knees. And the dangers didn't stop at bloodsucking. These weren't pristine garden ponds. We're talking murky, stagnant waters filled with bacteria, frogs, and occasionally a judgmental goose. You risked tetanus, athlete's foot, and trench foot shame. Pay a few pennies per dozen leeches, maybe some food, but mostly the satisfaction of contributing to the art of blood-sucking and the slow decline of patients' health. Bright side: no one's mugging you on the way home. Nobody wants to get that close, so you've tried cleaning up human waste and parasite ponds. And now you're wondering, what's the next step on this charming career ladder? How about burying the victims of the Black Death? Yep. Dear viewer, you've now become a professional plague spreader. Because in the Middle Ages, death didn't wait for job interviews. This gig has 3 main requirements: a shovel, a strong stomach, and zero concern for your own safety. Please bring your protective gear. Best case, a vinegar-soaked rag tied over your face. Worst case, nothing but your own optimism and some garlic someone swore could ward off evil spirits. When the plague hit in the mid-1300s, the death toll at witch trials spiked faster than usual. Whole neighborhoods were deserted overnight. Corpses piled up in streets, houses, and churches. Someone had to move them. Mass burials or digging graves for plague victims became your daily office. You'd spend hours digging trenches wide enough to toss in entire families. Sometimes there were no coffins, just bundles of limbs wrapped in cloth. Sometimes with a chicken thrown in for good luck. Or maybe it just wandered in. And don't expect gratitude. People avoided you like the plague itself. Show up at the market, and suddenly everyone remembers urgent errands elsewhere. You're the walking triple threat of medieval bad luck: cursed, smelly, and contagious. Now, the work never ends. No weekends, no holidays. The plague doesn't take breaks, and neither do you. The worst part, every day on the job is a gamble. Many barriers become what they bury, especially after sneezing or coughing the wrong way. Compensation? Theoretically, the town council might toss you a few coins or a stale piece of bread. In reality, you usually get paid if you're still alive. The upside A: clear sense of purpose. You're stopping cities from collapsing under the weight of death. But let's not romanticize it. Basically, you're playing a game of Tetris with corpses, while wondering if that weird itch on your arm is just fleas or fate. Welcome to the charming world of medieval textile production, where fashion meets fermentation. And you, humble washer, make sure no one wears a long-sleeve sweater that feels like a cactus. Your job simple: step on urine-soaked fabric until it's soft enough to be clothes. Not medieval sandpaper. See? Raw wool is oily, stiff, and sticks like an unpaid intern. To turn it into wearable fabric, you have to trick it. This process involves soaking the cloth in a mix of water, dirt, and, yes, urine. Why? Because old human pee contains ammonia, which cleans and softens the fibers. Why stomp on it for hours? Because machines hadn't been invented yet. And feet seemed like God's gift to medieval textile workers. But this is no gentle foot bath. You're knee-deep in a bucket of glorified liquid, stomping fabric like a winemaker gone rogue in their career plan. And you don't just stomp once or twice. You do this for hours every day, for years. Basically, you're living in a medieval foot bath and regretting it. The legend of the stench is real. So real that fake houses were built far from towns not because of zoning laws, but because no one could stand your job smell nearby. And let's talk health. Between trench foot, softening fabric fibers. Why stand in it for hours because machines hadn't been invented yet? And feet seemed like God's gift to medieval textile work. But this wasn't a gentle foot dip. You were knee-deep in a glorified liquid vat, stomping on fabric like a winemaker gone rogue. And you didn't do this once or twice. You did it for hours every day. For years. Basically, you lived in a medieval foot bath and regretted it. The legendary stink. So bad that fake houses were built far from town, not because of zoning laws, but because no one could stand your professional aroma nearby. And let's talk health. Between trench foot, ammonia burns, and mysterious rashes named like a divine curse. Your body was constantly revolting. Oh, and if your shoes got too wet, they'd probably be ruined by the weekend. Social status. Let's just say fullers weren't the life of the party. You were tolerated like pantry mice, or that cousin who won't stop talking about herbal remedies. Still, job security was a thing. People always needed clothes, and wool was king. The pantry is like that cousin who won't stop rambling about herbal remedies. But hey, job security's still a thing. People always need clothes and wool. Right, that's king stuff. As long as humans keep sweating, itching, and trying not to look like wild goats, your services will still be in demand. But at what cost? You're not exactly a high fashion designer. You're soaking your feet in someone else's bodily fluids, hoping no one asks what you actually do for a living at dinner. But, somehow, things just keep spiraling downward from here. Let's say you're sick of the whole liquid gig, both physically and mentally. And technically, you want a dry job? Congrats. You just got promoted to treadmill operator, the proud worker trapped inside a giant wooden hamster wheel. But instead of enjoying the view, you end up with chronic joint pain and a mild existential crisis. Your boss mostly works in church construction, hauling huge stones skyward with leg power alone and zero spine care. Imagine a crane. But the engine is you, walking in circles like a lost pilgrim. Medieval engineers thought, what if we slap a giant wheel on a person and pretend physics won't notice? And voila, the treadmill crane is born. The wheel usually hangs high off the ground, so you're not just walking, you're on a death wheel. 40 feet up, hauling stones heavier than your whole family combined. Lose your balance, gravity takes over. This isn't a construction site anymore. It's an impromptu funeral. Your daily rhythm walk. Walk some more. Occasionally, someone shoves a piece of bread in your hand. Then it's back to walking. The wheel creaks. The ropes rattle. And your knees start voicing complaints. And God forbid the guy behind you gets ambitious and speeds up. Suddenly, you're stuck in a medieval spin class straight from hell. No safety standards. You're lucky if the axle doesn't snap. Sometimes someone forgets to secure the counterweight properly, and the whole stone crashes down like a metaphor for your career. Is the pay good? Not exactly. You get paid for not getting crushed today, which back then was considered a pretty sweet benefit. You might even get stew at the end of your shift if you still have enough energy to hold a spoon. Still, you're part of something grand, a cathedral, a monument to faith, art, and architectural ambition. People will marvel at it for centuries, probably never thinking about the sweaty hamster rats hauling stones into place, grumbling about their aching ankles. But hey, at least you're not stepping on piss-soaked wool anymore. Progress. So you're sick of walking in circles and lugging stones like they're your marital regrets. Maybe you want something with more action, more drama, and a higher chance of getting bitten by something flea-ridden with malicious intent. Welcome to the glamorous life of a rat catcher, the unsung hero of urban hygiene, assuming you define hero as a guy wielding a stick, chasing rodents, and making questionable decisions. Rats were everywhere in medieval times. Grain stores, pubs overrun, castles trashed. They were basically luxury apartments for rats. And the solution to this pest plague wasn't poison traps or science. It was you. A net, a dog, and a deadpan look that says, "Seen it all." Your typical day involved crawling through dark, cramped spaces beneath buildings, chasing rats with bare hands or a tiny baton. Sometimes you used ferrets, sometimes terriers, sometimes just pure desperation, all while dodging bites, scratches, and sneezes from the biohazards scuttling around your boots. And let's be clear, these weren't cute Disney rats baking pies in someone's kitchen. These were medieval rats carrying disease, plague, and a whole lot of attitude. They lived off garbage, fought over breadcrumbs, and probably had better health insurance than you. Your gear, a burlap sack, a torch, and maybe some boiled leather gloves that offered about as much protection as a wet napkin. If you were lucky, you had a dog trained to sniff out nests. If not, under buildings, chasing rats with just your hands or a tiny baton. Sometimes you used ferrets, sometimes terriers, sometimes sheer desperation, all while dodging bites, scratches, or sneezes from dangerous biological nasties roaming your shoes. And let's be clear, these weren't Disney rats baking pies in someone's kitchen. These were medieval rats carrying diseases, plague, and pure rage. They lived off garbage, fought over crumbs, and probably had better health insurance than you. Your gear, a burlap sack, a torch, and maybe some boiled leather gloves that offered about as much protection as a wet napkin. If you were lucky, you had a dog trained to sniff out nests. If not, you'll need to carry a torch and scream your lungs out. Payment, Sure, let's just say no one got rich hunting rats. You'd get a few coins per tail. Yup, literally by the tail. That means you had to bring proof of your rat kills like a medieval loyalty program for vermin. Sometimes, the town would hire rat catchers during plague outbreaks, especially when folks started noticing an unusual number of corpses and fleas popping up. But once the panic died down, the budget and public respect dried up too. Like a puddle in the sun. Nobody wanted to sit near you, chat with you, or hear about your glorious rat hunting day. But deep down, everyone was secretly glad you existed, because without you, the rats would take over the land, or at least the pantry. Say you wanted to work indoors. Maybe you like kids. Maybe you dreamed of palace life, silk robes, and eating something that wasn't cooked in sadness. So, you took a job at the palace, watching a young noble. Sounds cozy, right wrong. You're the whipping boy, the living embodiment of punishment. Basically, the prince misbehaves. You get the beating. Yep, that's a real job. You see, noble kids, especially royal blood ones, were considered way too important, even sacred, to be physically punished. You can't bruise the future king just because he fed the cat gunpowder. So instead, they appointed another kid, usually lower status, as his constant companion, and if the prince broke the rules. You got whipped right in front of him while he watched, hopefully feeling guilty, but usually snacking. It's a weird, outsourced morality thing. You're supposed to be so emotionally close to the prince that he feels bad watching you get beaten. Cute theory unless you're dealing with a budding tyrant who thinks your screams sound like music. Your day involves trailing the royal brat through lessons, meals, horse rides, and sword fights. You're the best bud, study partner, and on bad days, his scapegoat. If he's rude to his tutor, you get the beating. Fail Latin, hope you like bruises. Throw a tantrum. Better start limping. No career ladder here. You don't get promoted to head whipping boy or assistant to the whipping crew. You just age assuming you survive without a permanently crooked spine. Surprisingly, some whipped boys ended up lifelong pals with their tormentors. After all, nothing bonds two kids like shared memories of one getting beaten for the other's mischief. Others disappeared from records, probably after wandering into the woods and deciding friendship isn't worth the pain. Salary, room and board, meals, and sometimes a thank you. No one ever erects statues for a beaten kid. But if you're lucky, you get clean clothes and eat at the prince's table before getting thrashed over his food fights. So you're fed up with rat bites and royal beatings. You crave peace, fresh air, and a job with no kids or rodents involved. Enter the lime kiln. A guy obsessed with breathing dust so much he thinks chimney sweeps are health influencers. What's your job? Burn limestone in a hot kiln to make quicklime. A key ingredient in everything from mortar and plaster to farming. And here's the kicker: dead bodies. Yep. Quicklime was sometimes used in burials to speed decomposition. So your handiwork is everywhere on walls, fields, and quietly dissolving poor Jeffrey behind the church. The process involves layering limestone and fuel wood, coal, or, if you're eco-friendly, dried dung in a big oven called a lime kiln. Then you burn it at hellish temperatures for days straight, and by you. I mean you stand nearby, shoveling material and poking it occasionally with a stick like a medieval pizza chef. If pizza could explode your lungs and set your shirt on fire, breathing near a lime kiln is like hugging a volcano while inhaling chalk dust, toxic smoke, dust everywhere, and the constant risk of spontaneous combustion. Just one strong gust, and you're coughing up rock dust while your eyebrows quietly fall off. Protective gear. If you're lucky, you get a rag to cover your mouth and wooden clogs if you're living the high life. Please wear gloves. Your calluses are thick enough to count as armor. Worse, one strong gust, and you'd cough up dust while your eyebrows quietly fell out. Protective gear. You ask if you were lucky. You'd have a rag to cover your mouth and wooden clogs if you lived the high life. Please, wear gloves. You've got calluses thick enough to count as armor. But wait, it gets worse. Quicklime freaks out on contact with water. So if it rained or you sweat too much, the powder could hiss, bubble, and burn right through your skin. Nothing like your own job slowly dissolving you from the inside out. Social life minimal. You smell like scorched dirt, look like a haunted chimney, and your lungs sound like a dying accordion. But hey, the silver lining, people respected your work. You laid the foundations for buildings and sometimes even helped create plague pits. Basically, that's a resume. Every shift brought you closer to whatever comes after all that of buildings, and sometimes you help create plague pits. So yeah, that's your resume. Still, every shift gets you closer to turning into a pile of dusty lungs. Now, if you want a gig with flexible hours, fresh air, and minimal supervision, don't mind night shifts, hate power, and aren't scared of corpses, congratulations. You're perfect for the resurrectionist life, aka the professional grave robber. But not just any grave robber. You don't steal rings or gold teeth. No. You want the whole body, of course. For science, purely academic. Please ignore the shovel and the lack of soul. By the late Middle Ages, medical schools started demanding bodies for dissection. The catch. The church frowned on cutting up corpses, and legal ways to get dead bodies were harder to find than a miser's wallet. Enter the resurrectionist. The middleman between fresh graves and anatomy lectures. Your night kicks off at the cemetery, where you quietly dig up the freshly buried, ideally within 48 hours before things get too soggy. You work fast, like a sprinter, usually with a partner. One digs, one watches, both pretending they're not about to drag Grandpa out of his eternal vacation. You couldn't care less about coffins. Too heavy, too noisy. Sometimes you smash the lid, pull out the body, and ditch the valuables. You argue it's not theft. It's just science with a recycling twist. Naturally, not everyone appreciates your role in medical progress like families, the church, and local cops. If you get caught, prison or public shaming's on the table, although execution is rare, which is ironic given how many bodies you've handled. Some towns even started rigging graves with mines, iron cages, heavy stones, and explosives. Yep, really. Nothing says eternal rest like a spring-loaded trap guarding your final nap. But the demand never stops. Doctors need bodies, and you're cheaper than the legal route. Sometimes you even get a standing order for a grown man, relatively intact. No, visible plague. Decent pay, especially for a job requiring no training besides owning a shovel and not freaking out. You make more per body than most farmers make in a month. Oh, right. The stool groom. This job proves that no matter how glamorous royal life is, someone's gotta deal with the king's exit strategy. Wondering if the title's metaphorical? Nope. Your full-time royal duty is helping the king. In his most private moments on the stool, the portable velvet-lined throne. Your job? Wipe for him. Think about that. This isn't just a medieval joke gone too far. No, it's a respected position. In fact, the wedding officiant was often a nobleman, someone the king trusted completely. Because when you see someone naked, sweaty, and groaning, that's a level of intimacy few courtiers reach. You don't just handle cloth. You hold influence. You control who gets access to the king in private meetings. You manage his wardrobe, letters, and even advise on policy. It's a weird power hustle. You're both the royal gatekeeper and the confidant. This job requires discretion, loyalty, and some serious backbone. You might also prep the stool, keep the toilet cloth clean, dust it with powder, spray perfume, and keep the king's behind spotless. Medieval kings didn't just rule, they pooped with style. Of course, you swore secrecy. Spilling royal secrets in a tavern would end your career, and maybe worse. Yet, thanks to court gossip, your knowledge of the king's diet and digestive habits made you a real doctor. Surprisingly famous, too. Gross. Sure. But this gig paid well. You lived in luxury, dined at the king's table, and sometimes scored land or titles, all just because you're basically the royal bathroom MVP. But bragging about that at parties? Yeah, good luck with that. Oh, right. I'm the reason the king doesn't blow his top, not as flashy as a knight or prime minister. Huh. So you think you're a medieval chef? How cute. Forget Michelin stars. You're aiming for a meal that won't send anyone to the afterlife. As a medieval cook, your job isn't to whip up gourmet dishes, but to stop digestive warfare crimes. You're not working with the freshest ingredients. You're dealing with the least rotten stuff, the kind of stuff that smells okay and only occasionally twitches. Your tools include a giant cauldron, a wooden spoon, roughly the size of a battle axe, and a blazing fire that can burn your stew or your eyebrows, sometimes both. Please, give me the recipe. Medieval recipes usually go like this. Take some meat, boil it, add a pinch of herbs, then pray. Quantities? Who knows? Instructions worse than useless. And if anyone complains, just tell them it's peasant style. Working for nobility means higher expectations and sneakier ways to cover up decay. Spices like pepper, cinnamon, and cloves don't enhance flavor. They mask the taste of impending doom. If the meat's still twitching, just toss in some saffron. Problem solved. Poultry still had feathers 5 minutes ago. Fish. Let's just hope it's not still blinking. Everything else goes into the stew. A murky pot of veggies, barley, and mystery meat simmered until it's mush. But the real horror feast day. Hundreds of guests, dozens of dishes, all cooked in a smoky, greasy kitchen with fat dripping from the ceiling. Dogs licking the floor. Sometimes the food. And there's always a mysteriously missing dishwashing boy. You're responsible for creating fancy creations, sugar or meat sculptures shaped like swans, dragons, or saints. Yep. You have to mold a saint out of pastry dough and still find time to boil 50 cabbages. If it collapses, guess who gets blamed? Spoiler, not St. John the Melty. Burns, cuts, infections, and food poisoning are all part of the gig. No fridge, no health inspector, and zero sympathy when the Lord's pigeon pie explodes. But if you don't poison anyone important, you might keep your job, born hungry. So you don't mind working a bit harder. Maybe you like the outdoors. Maybe you think lifting heavy stuff will get you biceps like those church frescoes. Welcome to the life of a miner, where your job is to literally wrestle with rocks, and rocks usually win. As a medieval miner, your day starts before sunrise and ends only when your arms stop listening to you. Your task? Cut, smash, and pry giant rocks out of the earth using only crude tools and the sheer power of terrible life choices. No fancy drills, no hydraulic systems, just hammer, chisel, wedges, and a deeply personal grudge against granite. You start by hammering iron nails into natural cracks to split the rock. It works, eventually, if you hit the same spot hard enough, often enough, while slowly going deaf. For kicks, you can pour cold water into hot cracks to try and crack the rock. Because when your job involves thermodynamics, it's a big red flag. Something's seriously wrong. Dust coats your lungs, teeth, and sandwiches, safety goggles. Not invented yet. So you just squint and hope today's not the day. A limestone shard pierces your eyeball. Let's not forget the real thrill cave-ins and falling rock chunks. One wrong move, and you trigger a domino effect of screams, chaos, and a terribly awkward workers' comp hearing, where some priest just shrugs and says, "Well, he died doing what he hated. Your reward? A handful of coins, a sore back, knowing that someday your stones might end up as a church, a dungeon, or some fancy toilet wall legacy. If you're lucky, you get sent to limestone or sandstone quarries soft rock. Yay. If not, you're stuck chipping granite, which is about as fun as a drunk tax collector. Social status, somewhere between side character and local ghost story. Romance prospects, only if someone's into dirt and long-winded chit-chat. But hey, at least you don't work indoors. So, feeling cardio ready, yet try being a medieval war messenger. It's like marathon running, mixed with risky diplomacy and the constant threat of being mistaken for enemy spies, with actual bad luck thrown in. Job description: simple. Deliver vital military intel across miles of enemy terrain without getting shot, stabbed, trampled, eaten, or captured. Imagine you're a medieval USB stick, just with worse encryption and a much higher death rate. Speed is everything. You have to outrun horses, outsmart bandits, and occasionally yell, "Don't kill me." I work here in several languages. If running fails, you can ride a horse, but horses get noticed more, and in wartime. Being noticed is the last thing you want, unless you're a flag. Delivering orders, secret troop movements, surrender demands, or weird letters explaining why the king's reinforcements are 3 weeks late and really drunk. Get caught, and you might be tortured for info. Get nabbed by your own side while changing clothes, and you could be hanged before you finish saying, "Wrong camp. Sorry, weather doesn't matter." They expect you to sprint through storms, mud, snow, or blazing sun, all while keeping your scroll dry and readable. Because nothing's worse than a soggy, ink-blotted message. Sometimes, you have to deliver orders right in the middle of battle, running through skirmish lines to tell the boss the left flank just collapsed, or just wander off hunting lunch. Archers don't care. Cavalry can't see you. Everyone else is too busy stabbing each other to hear. Please don't stab the guy with the parchment. And if you survive the whole ordeal, guess what? You get paid. Not bad. If you're quick, sneaky, and have a sixth sense for danger, your survival odds are only slightly better than a rock launched from a catapult. Just slightly. Despite the crazy risks, this gig has a weird kind of nobility. You're the fragile link between armies, the voice of kings, the sprinting hero when everyone else is ducking their heads. Because nothing screams heroism like delivering bad news at breakneck speed. Oh, and the blacksmith, the town's living furnace, part craftsman, part wizard, and a mobile sweat fountain all day long. If your job is to heat metal hotter than the sun and then beat it until it begs for mercy, congrats. You're perfect for this. Your workspace. A forge hotter than a July night's armpit, full of soot, sparks, and enough noise to kill any thought of peace. No rooster needed to wake the village. Just the constant clang, clang, clang of your daily metal opera. Blacksmiths make everything: horseshoes, plow blades, swords, nails, armor, hinges, and about 600 other things that people break every week, all needing to be fixed yesterday. Oh, great smith. My cow kicked off its shoe. Oh, mighty hammer wielder. My gate hinge squeaks. I need a new sword. This one's too bendy. Everyone loves you. Until you have to yell at them. Then suddenly, your body is battered, burned, deaf in one ear, and your dominant hand is as thick as a tree trunk. The romantic side, not too shabby. You've got muscles and permanent charcoal eyeliner, but small talk is tough when every sentence comes with a cough and a mysterious fire blazing behind you. Danger. Oh yeah, molten metal, flying sparks, cracking iron instead of bending, the anvil, and one careless second, and your beard's a torch. If you work for a castle or army, congratulations. You're now mass-producing weapons for impatient guys who settle every argument with an axe. Hope you like deadlines enforced by swords. But no matter what, blacksmiths are essential. You're the backbone of technology, the town's answer to "Can you fix this?" coughs and mysterious flames bursting behind you. Speaking of danger, red-hot metal, flying sparks, iron cracking instead of bending, and anvils that, with 1 second of distraction, can turn your beard into a candle. If you work for the castle or army, congrats. You're now mass-producing weapons for impatient dudes who solve every problem with an axe. Hope you like deadlines enforced with swords. But no matter what, blacksmiths are essential. You're the tech backbone, the town's answer to "Can you fix this?" Long before engineers existed, humans designed tools. Long before influencers, you set trends. You make the stuff people actually need to survive and sometimes look really cool doing it. Yet, no statues of you. Just more broken metal bits and a customer asking if it's cheaper without the decorative curls. Oh yes, the medieval busker, wandering performer, poet with lute, the podcast nobody asked for but can't mute 'cause they're stuck in the Lord's palace. Being a poet sounds romantic until you realize your job is part musician, part court jester, a suspicious cough. You sing about kings, battles, doomed lovers, and dragons that probably were just oversized lizards. Anything to earn a coin, a meal, or at least avoid getting hit with a turnip. Every gig is different. One night, you're singing hymns for nobles in a candlelit hall. Next, you're dodging drunk peasants in a smoky tavern when someone yells. Play the one about knights getting eaten, and you better do it, because that song pays in bread. Your biggest challenge isn't remembering lyrics, it's surviving the politics. Say one wrong word about the Lord's hairstyle, and suddenly you're the star of the next execution ballad. The line between clever satire and treasonous insult is thinner than your patience and strictly watched. You're also expected to memorize history, which back then meant whatever your paycheck said was true. Did Sir Godfrey win the battle? Doesn't matter. If Sir Godfrey invites you to dinner, you better make him happy. And keep it clean. Bars were more famous for their moods than their smells. Lice, fleas, and holy boots were common sights. Your clothes smelled like wood smoke and failure. But you made up for it with charm, wit, and a weird knack for rhyming sword with board. Still, you held power. You shaped public memory. You spread news faster than a town crier with a megaphone. You were medieval PR, but with more string instruments and less shame. Sometimes, you'd strike gold and become a court poet, living in a noble's house, writing songs for weddings and war campaigns, until you rhymed honor with goner and found yourself back on the road. So, yeah, the poet's life sounds romantic in theory. In reality, it's cold, itchy, and totally dependent on your ability to rhyme under pressure. It all starts with whispers, the whispers of dragon-shaped sails, warriors with iron beards and eyes like frozen seas. The Seine has always been Paris's lifeblood wide, proud and peaceful, but in spring, 845, that river became a warning. Frankish towns along the coast fell silent. No bells, no smoke from chimneys, just debris drifting and blood on the tide. When this news reached Paris, the question wasn't if the Norsemen were coming. It was how bad it'd get and when. But this wasn't your usual raid. This wasn't some seafaring band looking for golden sheep. This was Ragnar Lothbrok to the Franks. His name sounded like thunder crashing over church roofs. Ragnar, the man who claimed to be Odin's descendant. Ragnar, whose sons would later terrorize Europe. But right now, he was very much alive, charismatic, and hungry for loot, with 120 longships and over 5,000 warriors at his command. He wasn't sneaking into Paris. He was announcing himself. His sails cast shadows on the riverbank. The rowing stirred the sand like the march of fate. Every monastery and village along the river was looted, burned, or enslaved. The Franks prayed. Their king, Charles the Bald, scrambled to build defenses. But his land was already stretched thin by civil war and internal strife. The church called for divine intervention. Nobles argued over which bridge to defend. Meanwhile, Ragnar kept rowing. He didn't need siege engines or like thunder rolling across a church roof. Ragnar, the man who claimed to be Odin's descendant. Ragnar, whose son would later terrorize Europe. But right now, he's still lively, charming, and hungry for loot. With 120 longships and over $5,000 warriors under his command. Sneaking into Paris was not an option. He announced himself. His sails cast shadows on the riverbank. The oars stirred the sand like destiny's footsteps. Every monastery and village along the riverbank was looted, burned, or enslaved. The Franks prayed. Their king, Charles the Bald, scrambled to build defenses. But his lands were strained by civil war and internal conflicts. The church begged for divine intervention. Nobles argued over which bridge to defend. Meanwhile, Ragnar kept rowing. He didn't need siege tools or fancy strategies. He had fire, fear, and time. The people of Paris stood on half-built walls, watching the river darken with approaching death. Mothers hid their kids in cellars. Priests clutched holy relics. And the king's messengers, sweaty, terrified, barely literate, begged nearby cities for reinforcements that never arrived. A complex strategy. He's got fire, fear, and time on his side. Parisians stand atop half-built walls, watching the river darken with the approach of death. Mothers hide their kids in wine cellars. Priests clutch holy relics. And the king's messengers, sweating and scared, barely literate, beg neighboring towns for help that never arrives in time. The Norsemen aren't just tavern legends anymore. They're real, and they're here. Ragnar's at the helm, laughing wildly, ready to make history. No mistaking it. Those long, narrow ships glide down the river like snakes. The prow carved with fierce beasts, eyes painted to scare off evil spirits. Except this time, the evil's already on board. The river like snakes. The prow carved into fierce beasts, eyes painted on to scare off evil spirits. Except this time, the evil was already on board. Ragnar's fleet wasn't just some ragtag fishing crew turned looters. These guys were battle-hardened pros from years of fighting in England, Ireland, and the North Sea. Each longship was a floating war machine, powered by men who measured time in battles and bloodshed. Their shields hung neatly along the sides, forming a deadly painted wall. Behind them stood warriors with braided hair and tattooed arms, some decked out in iron armor stolen from Frankish corpses, others shirtless and smeared with Marden ash to intimidate. And it worked. As Ragnar's ships sailed upriver, every village and monastery on the way became rehearsal space for the main event. Churches in Paris went up in flames. Clerics were slaughtered or chained up. Any Frankish soldiers brave enough to fight back got skewered and tossed into the river. And if villagers were lucky, they got robbed. If not, everything they owned was burned to the ground. Ragnar made sure to leave survivors, but not out of mercy. It was a strategy. He wanted word of his wrath to reach Paris before he did. He wanted the city to drown in its own fear, and it worked. What made this fleet terrifying wasn't just the numbers, but the coordination. These weren't crazed warriors charging blindly. Ragnar divided his forces like a chess grandmaster. Some raided deep inland, looting monasteries like Sandon. Others guarded the ships, with the river as their highway and lifeline. Then, like some brutal theater, they reached the gates of Paris, the Frankish capital, still reeling from civil war, famine, and plague. Now faced an army that refused to negotiate, only to pillage. At the walls, Ragnar ordered villages occupied by the Franks to be burned in sight of the city gates. Smoke rose like a dark prophecy. He wasn't just threatening the city. He was daring them to stop him. As the firelight flickered on the Seine and his painted sails, Ragnar looked at Paris's stone walls not with fear or respect, but with hunger. Because for Ragnar, Paris wasn't a challenge, it was a prize. Paris in 845 wasn't the fortress of later centuries, it was a city on an island, Île de la Cité, surrounded by 2 wooden bridges and protected by flimsy walls. The defenders were few, mostly local militias, sword-wielding monks, and nobles more interested in titles than fighting. In other words, Ragnar's dinner. The Viking leader didn't waste time. Upon arrival, he launched a probing attack on the outskirts, Testing the defenders' resolve, what he found was laughable. The Franks reacted in chaos, slow and scared. So, Ragnar pushed forward, surrounding central Paris. He split his forces, blockading the island from both riverbanks. Now the Seine was his. No boats in, no boats out. The trade stopped. Food deliveries halted. Panic spread. Ragnar's men set up camp everywhere, playing dice, drinking, and sharpening swords just within earshot of the walls. They knew the art of waiting. The longer the siege dragged on, the weaker the prey. Paris tried to resist. Archers lined the bridges. Bells rang nonstop. Priests held mass 3 times a day, begging for divine intervention while ignoring the stench of fear in the air. The Franks tried a counterattack from one bridge, but it was a disaster. Ragnar's troops pretended to retreat, luring the Franks into open ground and ambushing them. Bodies floated back to the city, bloated and torn apart. Ragnar loved making things worse. He caught dozens of Frankish soldiers in a skirmish. Instead of ransoming them, he nailed them to the riverbank. He left their corpses on display for all Paris to see, as if to say, "Your prayers mean nothing to me inside the walls." Famine crept in slowly, day by day. Food stores dwindled, morale plummeted, and disease spread. The people were counting on their king, Charles the Bald, but he was nowhere to be found. He'd hightailed it to safety while his capital went up in flames. Meanwhile, Ragnar, not a sweat. The guy just sat by the fire, sharpening his axe, watching smoke curl up from the churches he'd torched, grinning like it was all part of the plan. The siege wasn't just working, it was turning into a masterpiece. Paris was starving, and King Charles the Bold, he was having a royal meltdown. Safe in his distant court, he paced, prayed, and freaked out. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not on his watch. He was a Carolingian king, a descendant of Charlemagne, the hammer-wielding foe of pagans. Yet here he was, outdone by a pagan pirate with killer cheekbones and a penchant for arson. Charles had problems. First up, his broken kingdom. The Frankish Empire had splintered into rival factions, and Charles's nobles were loyal only as far as a soggy piece of bread. Every call for reinforcements got excuses. "We're defending our own turf," or "good luck." "Your Majesty," no one wanted to throw their soldiers into Ragnar's meat grinder. Problem 2, cash or the lack of it. The treasury was dry after years of internal fighting and overspending on religious stuff. But worse than that was the insult to royal pride. Getting Viking revenge was a stain on the crown's honor. Still, Charles was out of options, and honor wouldn't keep him on the throne if Ragnar decided to sack the capital. So, he tried bargaining. Messengers were sent with sweet deals, gold, supplies, even titles if the Vikings would just pack up and leave. But Ragnar wasn't having it. He wasn't interested in empty promises. He wanted Paris, and he was happy to wait until the folks inside started eating each other. Then came the risky gamble. Charles scrambled to put together a last-minute army. Nothing fancy, just a patchwork crew of barely trained peasants, local counts, and anyone willing to trade their life for a little silver. Their mission: break the siege and save the city. Things went exactly how you'd expect. Ragnar caught wind of the plan before the first boot hit the riverbank. His men ambushed the reinforcements near the outskirts. What happened next was a massacre. Charles's reinforcements were slaughtered, scattered, or captured. Prisoners faced Ragnar's usual justice, some hung from trees, others used for target practice. Back at court, Charles got the news like a gut punch. He'd failed. His army was crushed. Paris was done for. So, swallowing his pride like a bitter beer, Charles played his last card, bribery, because when swords fail, gold speaks louder. In the end, it wasn't faith, fire, or Frankish steel that saved Paris. It was silver, lots of silver. Charles the Bald, with no army and zero excuses, did the one thing every ruler fears. He cut a deal. Not brave, not glorious, just survival. And it came with a hefty price. 7,000 silver marks. That's over 2.5 tons of treasure. Enough to bankrupt a region and enough to make Ragnar's beard twitch with delight. But Charles wasn't bargaining from strength. He was bargaining on his knees. His messengers approached Ragnar's camp, hands shaking and pouches heavy. No fanfare, no threats, just a desperate plea. Take the silver, leave the city, and maybe leave us some dignity as a pro. Ragnar didn't gloat. At least, not right away. He listened, squinted thoughtfully, and maybe pretended to consider rejecting the offer for dramatic effect. But, of course, he took it. He didn't march 5,000 warriors across half of Frankish land just to play demolition derby with some flimsy walls. He came for treasure, and the Frankish king just opened the vault. The handover wasn't ceremonial. It was a transaction. Chest after chest of silver loaded onto Viking ships. The Frankish family watched in silence. The Vikings watched with glee. Some danced, others drank. Some an offer to impress. But of course, he took it. The man didn't drag 5,000 warriors across half of Francia just to play demolition with weak walls. He came for treasure, and the Frankish king had just opened his vault. This wasn't some ritual handoff. This was a deal. Each silver chest was loaded onto Viking ships. The Frankish family watched silently. The Vikings watched gleefully. Some danced. Others drank. Some even openly debated whether to take the money and sack the city anyway. But Ragnar, the strategist, chose reputation over greed by taking the ransom and letting Paris go. He sent a message louder than any torch or axe could scream. I can break you, but I don't have to. Just pay up. This was economic warfare, not some wild riot. The Franks family was utterly stunned. Their king just handed over a big fat check to a pagan warlord and let him walk away unscathed. The clergy sobbed over incense. Nobles seethed behind closed doors. But the common folk, they were just relieved to be alive. The siege was lifted. The bridges. He loaded his ship with silver, raised the sails, and started the journey home victorious, unharmed, paid like a king by a real king. Behind him, Paris smoldered, not in rubble, but in shame. With the jingle of silver on the ship's hull and smoke curling in the distance, Ragnar turned his longships back to the Seine, not as a raider running away, but as a conqueror leaving on his own terms. His warriors sang, their voices echoing along the riverbanks like the last laugh of a villain who'd just gotten away with everything. Ragnar didn't just win a battle, he earned a legend. As the fleet drifted downstream, they passed ruined villages burned monasteries and looted abbeys they'd smashed on the way up. Nothing could stop their path. The Franks didn't dare try, especially after what happened in Paris. Not after watching their king get bounced like a bad check. Some legends say Ragnar piled so much silver on his ship that he had to toss some into the river just to keep it afloat. Others claim he paraded Frankish prisoners nailed to crosses as a parting gift. Whatever the truth, one thing's clear: Ragnar left the frontier richer, more notorious, and completely unscathed. No real effort was made to stop him. Charles the Bald, licking his wounds, didn't want any more embarrassment, and even if he had tried, he didn't have the resources or the people's trust to do anything about it. He'd paid the wolf, and now had to live with the smell of blood right at his doorstep. For Ragnar, the trip home wasn't a vacation. It was a victory parade. His fame spread across Europe, to the Norse. He was a living legend, proof the gods favored the bold. To the Franks, he was a nightmare they couldn't shake. To other Viking chiefs, he set the gold standard for raiding burn, terrorize, get paid, and sail off. The psychological scars ran deeper than any blade. After all, Ragnar didn't storm Paris with ladders or siege engines. He broke it with fear, fire, and sheer audacity. And that's probably the scariest part. He could have taken the city, but didn't need to. When those dragon ships vanished over the horizon, one thing was crystal clear: Ragnar Lodbrok just robbed one of Christendom's mightiest kings and walked away unscathed. The Viking Age wasn't over. It had just arrived. When the dragon ships disappeared and the river fell silent, Paris didn't celebrate. It exhaled slowly, trembling, like a city waking up from a nightmare. The siege was over, but the trauma had only begun. The city was soaked in smoke, sweat, and unwashed fear. Bridges were charred, churches vandalized, streets littered with the bones of failed resistors. Technically, the walls still stood, but the idea of safety was ashes. People tiptoed out of cellars with sunken eyes, as if expecting the Norse to come back and finish the job. The first thing to return wasn't hope. It was blame. Fingers pointed every which way. The clergy blamed the king for cowardice. The nobles blamed each other for not sending help. Everyone blamed both, and the bitter truth was always there. Charles the Bald paid the enemy and left his capital in ruins. No spin could call it a tactical retreat or clever diplomacy. Everyone knew it was panic money. The church tried to spin Paris's survival as a miracle, a test of faith, or a sign of future salvation. But the people knew better. It wasn't angels that saved them. It was silver. Worse still, the ransom drained the royal coffers. Inflation soared. Taxes skyrocketed. The first thing back wasn't hope. Nope. It was blame. Fingers pointed everywhere. The clergy blamed the king for his cowardice. The nobles blamed each other for not sending help. Everyone blamed both. And the bitter truth was always there. Charles the Bald paid off the enemy and left, his capital in ruins. No spin could dress that up as a tactical retreat or clever diplomacy. Everyone knew the score panic money. The church tried to mark Paris's survival as some divine miracle, a test of faith, or a sign of future salvation. But the people knew better. It wasn't angels that saved them. It was silver. Even worse. The ransom drained the royal treasury. Inflation soared. Taxes skyrocketed. Monasteries wept over stolen relics. The countryside already worn down by years of civil war and famine, grew weaker day by day. The legend of Ragnar Lothbrok grew bigger, while the Carolingian throne lost more and more power. Militarily, the fallout was even worse. Ragnar exposed the Frankish defense's weak spots. He didn't need catapults or siege engines, just a river and a reason. It was just the beginning. A prologue, a warning. Paris survived. Sure, but it was humiliated, wounded, and forced to self-destruct. Wounds like that don't heal overnight. And in the smoky silence afterward, a question hung over every broken gate and prayer-stained floor. What happens when the next Ragnar shows up? The 845 raid on Paris wasn't even over by the time Ragnar got home. Actually, it sparked something way bigger. The legacy of terror, tactics, and cultural dominance echoed through Europe for generations. Other Viking chiefs heard of Ragnar's exploits, took notes, and boarded their ships. Word about the Frankish ransom spread fast across the north, along with a surprising truth: you don't have to die a hero on the battlefield to make your mark. You can also die rich. Ragnar proved that gold spilled from scared kings was way more than from burning cities. Soon, raiders from Denmark, Norway, and Sweden set their sights on the Seine, Loire, and Rhine rivers. They weren't reckless pirates anymore. They were axe-wielding entrepreneurs. Viking raids turned into annual events in Francia, like a grim, bloody holiday. Every summer brought new fleets, new demands, and new ransoms. Ragnar's tactics became doctrine-fast boats, brutal attacks, spread terror, then collect the payout and vanish. Cities started hoarding silver, not for trade, but for defense. Monasteries hid relics, not out of piety, but out of fear. The Franks responded by fortifying and praying, but it still wasn't enough. Over time, Viking raids turned into settlements, first winter camps, then forts, then towns. By the late 9th century, Norsemen had laid down solid roots in Francia, including what would later become Normandy, literally, the land of the Northmen. It all started with Ragnar's siege of Paris, and his legend spread beyond the battlefield. Songs were sung, tales told. Some say he then attacked the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, got thrown into a snake pit, and laughed himself to death. Others claim he spent his last days in luxury, watching his sons tear Europe apart in his name. Whatever the truth, Ragnar, the cunning, brutal, unshakable lord, is immortal now. He's no longer just a man. He's a symbol, the ultimate example of how one lone leader can exploit a divided kingdom, shatter its pride, and create a legend. The siege of Paris wasn't just a Viking win. It was the blueprint for Viking domination. Paris still stood, but never the same again. The memory of Ragnar's siege was carved into the city's stones, the nightmare of clergy, and the policy of every king after Charles the Bald. It wasn't just a story. It was a warning even the mightiest city could fall to one man on a longship, armed with fire, grit, and a greedy grin. Frankish responses in the following decades were downright paranoid. Paris beefed up defenses, not just thicker walls and stronger bridges, but laws too. River traffic was monitored. Watchtowers popped up like angry sentries along the Seine. And the wounded, humiliated monarchy slowly regained respect by reforming the army and centralizing power. Those painful lessons laid the groundwork for the Capetian dynasty, the future of France. But the scars remained. to ordinary Parisians. Ragnar wasn't a legend. He was personal. Parents used his name to scare kids into behaving. Do your chores. Or the Northmen will come. The monarchy, bruised and humiliated, slowly clawed back respect by reforming the army and centralizing power. Ultimately, these painful lessons built the foundation for the Capetian dynasty, the future of France. But the scars remained. To the everyday Parisians, Ragnar wasn't a legend. It was personal. Parents used his name to scare kids into behaving. Do your chores, or the Vikings will come get you. Merchants and monks alike remembered the screams in the streets, the black smoke, and the eerie silence afterward. And even years later, whenever a foreign sail showed up on the horizon, old men would mutter, "Here they come again." But the legacy wasn't all fear. The siege sparked a weird cultural exchange. Soaked in blood, though it was, one day, Viking mercenaries would serve Frankish kings. Norse settlers in Normandy would become Christian lords. The enemies outside the walls turned into court knights. Ironically poetic, almost romantic, that the very culture that once raided Paris later came to defend it. But deep in the city's DNA, something changed. Ragnar's siege shattered the illusion of invincibility. Paris wasn't untouchable. It got bribed, broken, and held together. And the city never forgot that bitter lesson. Every archbishop blessing a sword, every tax collector weighing coins, every guard on the wall all acted under the long shadow of 845. Because when a bunch of guys armed with iron, fire, and guts can make an empire tremble and force a king to pay up, the world pays attention and the world changes forever in the Middle Ages. Salvation didn't start in a church pew. It started with blisters. Being a good Christian wasn't just about going to Mass or confessing sins. Sometimes it meant putting one foot in front of the other and walking hundreds of miles to visit a holy site. These trips were called pilgrimages, deeply spiritual, but also ridiculously physical. Imagine a barefoot peasant trudging through rain, snow, and occasional cow poop, all just to stand before a saint's bone in a gold-plated box. Motivation, eternal salvation. Or at least some heavenly brownie points. The church loved pilgrimages as a get-out-of-sin-free card. Adultery. Go to Santiago. Lied to a priest. Try Canterbury. Murder. Yeah. Maybe just start walking to Jerusalem and don't stop. But it wasn't always about sin. Pilgrimages could be a way to say thanks, ask for healing, or just an excuse to ditch your village without being labeled a heretic. For women, it was one of the few socially acceptable ways to travel. For knights, it was a way to avoid stabbing people while proving their holiness. And for many, it was the only vacation they'd ever get. The call to pilgrimage came in many forms: dreams, sermons, or a sharp reminder from a local priest, like, God might forgive you if you walk 800 miles with a sore back and no shoes. Families often sent a pilgrim representative, kind of like outsourcing their spiritual duties. It was believed one walker could bring blessings to the whole clan. Lucky them. After committing, pilgrims got blessings and looked for omens: a staff, a pouch, and a badge usually shaped like a scallop shell or a cross. These symbols marked them as holy wanderers, not drifters. A crucial difference when you're crashing in barns and begging for food. But don't get it twisted. Pilgrimage wasn't a countryside stroll. It was a grueling journey full of exhaustion, uncertainty, and a faint hope that something divine awaited at the end. That is, if the road didn't kill you first, before taking that first dusty step. Medieval pilgrims faced a real dilemma. What to pack when you're about to walk thousands of miles with no Amazon deliveries, no waterproof shoes, and definitely no snack bars? The answer: as little as possible, but still way too much. Pilgrims packed their whole lives into a bag about the size of a modern handbag. Weight was the enemy. Every extra robe meant carrying extra ounces over mountains, swamps, and bandit-infested forests. So they only brought essentials. If lucky, a spare linen outfit, some dried food, a water bottle or pouch, and maybe, just maybe, a tiny religious trinket reminding them their suffering was totally on purpose. Then came the gear. Not hiking accessories. Pilgrims packed their whole lives into a bag about the size of a modern purse. Weight was the enemy. Every extra robe meant lugging an extra ounce across mountains, swamps, and bandit-filled forests. So they only carried the essentials. If you were lucky, maybe a spare linen outfit, some dried food, a flask or water pouch, and maybe a small religious trinket reminding you that your suffering had a purpose. Then came the staff. Not just a hiking stick, a multifunctional magic wand. You used it to walk, fend off wild dogs or bandits, test the depth of mud pits, and sometimes to poke snoring pilgrims in the church. Your hat needed a wide brim to block sun and rain, and it better look pilgrim cool. Bonus points if you pinned a scallop shell on it, the universal badge of a Santiago de Compostela pilgrimage. That shell got you into monasteries, charity kitchens, and free hay in barns. Think of it as your medieval passport, no expiration date, and everyone knew you were probably broke. Shoes were another misery. Most pilgrims wore sandals or low leather shoes. Barely better than going barefoot. Blisters were inevitable. Shoes. Yeah, another nightmare. Most pilgrims rocked sandals or low leather shoes. Barely better than going barefoot. Blisters? Forget about it. They were like a guarantee of suffering. Many wrapped their feet in linen and prayed their toes didn't rot off before the next shrine. Food. You didn't carry much. Instead, you relied on strangers, monasteries, or fellow pilgrims' charity. And charity often meant a bowl of onion soup with a dry crust of bread, if you were too proud to beg. Congrats, you were also too proud to eat. Maybe the most crucial item wasn't even something physical. A pilgrim's letter. This document, issued by the church, proved you weren't just some homeless drifter. It was your sacred license. And without it, you might end up in jail instead of heaven. So, with aching feet, a heavy sack, and a silent prayer, the pilgrim hit the road, because when packing for the afterlife, there's no such thing as traveling light. Leaving the comfort of your village or whatever passed for comfort in medieval Europe meant stepping onto a vast, unpredictable road that didn't give a damn about your prayers. Let's start with the terrain. Medieval roads weren't roads in the modern sense, depending on the weather. They could be lovely walking paths or deadly mud traps. Rain turned everything into soup, snow hid wolves. And summer, it roasted your skin and attracted every biting insect between Normandy and Jerusalem. Bandits were a constant threat. Pilgrims were easy prey, unarmed, underfed, and carrying some coins or religious trinkets to pawn. A lone pilgrim was basically a mobile donation box with legs. Traveling in groups didn't guarantee safety either. Some thieves disguise themselves as fellow pilgrims to blend in. Nothing says betrayal like getting robbed by a guy wearing the same scallop shell as you. Then there were the animals: wolves, bears, wild boars, all ready to remind you that being eaten alive might just be your ultimate sin. Stray dogs, not man's best friend, but territorial, ferocious, and scabby. One wrong turn in the forest, and you're not just lost, you're blacklisted. But even deadlier than bandits or wild beasts was temptation. Pilgrimage routes were littered with taverns, brothels, and gambling dens, especially near big towns. Some pilgrims never made it past the first city before their holy vows dissolved into a haze of booze, dice, and regret. The church frowned on it, but tavern owners welcomed your soul's decay with open arms and cheap beer. Even your fellow pilgrims could be a problem. There were con artists, freeloaders, and self-proclaimed prophets hawking weird visions in exchange for food. Arguments broke out over sleeping spots, directions, and who smelled worse. You could be halfway to Rome and suddenly find yourself in a heated debate about the Virgin Mary with a barefoot fisherman from Flanders. Yet somehow, most folks kept going. The journey was both a test of endurance and a mental obstacle course. Every muddy mile, every distant wolf howl, every temptation resisted or shamefully indulged became part of the story, part of the sacrifice, because holiness wasn't made inside a church. It was made with every blistered step through the muck, after weeks or months of slogging through filth, hunger, and sin. The pilgrim finally saw it. Rising over the hills, a tower, a dome, or a sparkling shrine, the sacred site where miracles were said to happen. And it was usually smaller than expected. Whether it was the shrine of St. Thomas Becket in Canterbury, St. James's Bones in Santiago de Compostela, or St. Margaret's suspiciously well-preserved toe somewhere in France, sacrifice. Because holiness wasn't built inside the church walls, it was forged with every blistered step through the mud. After weeks, or even months of dragging yourself through filth, hunger, and sin, the pilgrim finally saw it, rising above the hills, a tower, a dome, or a glimmering shrine, a sacred site where miracles were said to happen. And it was usually smaller than expected. Whether it was the shrine of St. Thomas Becket at Canterbury, the bones of St. James in Santiago de Compostela, or St. Margaret's toe somewhere suspiciously well preserved in France. Different destinations, same vibe, the whole holy hype. These spots were basically medieval Disneyland, except instead of roller coasters, you got to gawk at relics, candle processions, and occasionally an exorcism or two. The relics themselves were the main attraction, but honestly, medieval Europe had a bit of a relic inflation problem. There were enough bits of the true cross to fill a forest. Everyone claimed to own John the Baptist's skull, sometimes even 3 skulls in the same city. Authenticity. Who cares? Faith was already bought in. Pilgrims knelt to touch the relics. Some cry, some faint. Many just touch the shrine and whisper desperate prayers. Please heal my blind eyes. Forgive my adultery. Fix my back pain. People believed saints had superpowers, and their bones could still work miracles like a medieval vending machine of the miraculous. And where there are miracles, there's money. Towns popped up around shrines, raking in massive profits. Inns, taverns, jewelers, and monks charging steep blessing fees all thrived. You could buy candles, holy water, amulets, even tiny bottles, supposedly filled with saintly sweat, for a fair price. Your soul could get a quick forgiveness pass. The church was totally on board. Pilgrimage sites brought fame, donations, and a steady stream of religious tourists. Whole cathedrals were built just to house a toe bone or a dried-out robe. And the juicier the relic legend, the bigger the crowds. Bleeding statues. Yep. Incorruptible corpses. Absolutely. Talking skulls. Someone definitely claimed that one already. Yet, even amid all that, many pilgrims were genuinely awestruck, standing silently by candlelight before a golden relic. After a grueling journey, it felt like you were just a step away from heavenly bliss. Might not look like much, but to a weary soul, that shrine was the whole world. Pilgrimage wasn't just a spiritual quest, it was big business. Every pilgrim's step meant coins changing hands. Beggars thrived on the faithful stream, and when hundreds, even thousands, flooded a town yearly, the local economy didn't just survive, it boomed. Welcome to the pilgrimage trap. A village with a so-so shrine suddenly spots a miracle, a goat giving birth with a cross-shaped mark on her side. Next thing you know, a chapel pops up, candles are lit, and someone's charging 3 dinars to see a finger bone belonging to some saint. Tourists arrive, merchants follow. The church blesses and takes a cut of the offerings. Tourists come, merchants trail behind. The church blesses and pockets part of the donations. Of course, top moneymakers like Santiago de Compostela became huge pilgrimage hubs. The whole industry went wild. Cloak weavers for dusty travelers, cobblers fixing worn-out shoes, and bakers churning out rock-hard bread that could last weeks without molding. You could even hire a medieval pilgrimage guide, promising protection and directions for a price. Except these guides were just well-dressed bandits with contracts. Merchants sold souvenirs from horse-drawn carts, tiny tin badges shaped like shrine relics, proudly worn by pilgrims to brag about where they'd been like medieval travel stickers. You might even get a fake if you were too lazy or too clever to finish the whole route. Monasteries played a big role too. Not exactly quiet retreats. Many were well-oiled hospitality machines. Monks welcomed pilgrims with beds and soup, but donations were expected. Some were genuinely kind. Others had a knack for holy price gouging. Then there were the scammers, fake relics, staged miracles, fake monks, and self-proclaimed saints promising miracle cures in exchange for your worldly possessions. Pilgrims had to walk a thin line between faith and foolishness. Still, most joined willingly. They knew the game. They were part of it. After all, isn't salvation worth a few coins in the end? The road to heaven might be paved with prayers, but it was laid with silver, though the path was lonely. Few pilgrims walked alone. Safety in numbers was the rule, not the exception. Groups formed naturally fellow villagers, merchants heading the same way, or strangers just limping along together with a shared goal. Like a medieval backpacker hostel, these bands were chaotic, noisy, and downright weird, to the point of being downright cozy. And trust me, they never get boring. The group vibe swings wildly between heartwarming unity and total chaos. 1 minute, you're sharing crusty bread under a tree. The next, you're yelling at someone for stealing your turnip. Pilgrims came from all walks of life: nobles, peasants, monks, widows, merchants, and criminals seeking redemption. What could possibly go wrong? Language barriers. Yeah, those didn't help. A German pilgrim might buddy up with an English peasant and a Breton nun. The result? Lots of pointing, miming, and occasionally fistfights over who gets the dry spot under the stable's eaves. Arguments often broke out over food, pace, or whose saint badge was shinier. Some pilgrims took vows in silence which worked fine until someone tripped over a bag and smashed a holy water bottle. Then, all bets were off. But amid the bickering, something deeper usually formed camaraderie. Sharing a muddy, disease-ridden, fear-soaked road tends to make people vulnerable. You'd laugh at the ridiculous scenes. Two folks helped each other when sickness struck. You prayed together when wolves howled too close. You cried when someone died on the road, which happened way more often than anyone admits. There were also weirdly joyful moments, spontaneous singing, stories by the fire, kind acts from total strangers, a loaf of bread shared, a dry cloak handed over, or a silent hand on your shoulder at a shrine. It wasn't all misery. Some pilgrims said the socializing was the best part. Many returned home with new friends, letters from abroad, or stories about some Italian guy juggling knives and singing hymns. Others said quiet goodbyes, parting at a crossroads with a nod and a prayer. Because on the pilgrimage, people come and go like clouds, but the journey always moves forward. Not every pilgrim had pure intentions. Sure, many started with sincere goals, repentance, healing, a fresh start. But medieval life, like our world today, was full of contradictions. And nowhere did piety and pride clash more amusingly than on the pilgrimage trail. Some pilgrims cared more about how others saw them than why they were walking. They made sure everyone knew how far they'd gone, how much they'd suffered, and how many prayers they'd said for a moldy loaf. Humility was mandatory, dramatic storytelling optional. Then there were the fashion-forward pilgrims. Yes, really. Wealthy nobles dressed like ordinary travelers but with pricey cloaks, carved walking sticks, and embroidered bags. They hired servants for luggage, and sometimes even rode horses most of the way, because nothing says spiritual pain like a mobile feather mattress. While most pilgrims trudged mile after painful mile, some found shortcuts both literally and figuratively. Some hired coaches for parts of the journey, or paid others to haul their carts. A few just bought pilgrim badges at the market and skipped the whole trip. Why risk wolves and drama when you can fake it with a shiny tin shell and a convincing fib? But spiritual cheating came with consequences. The church wasn't thrilled about these so-called fake pilgrims. Some towns even posted guards along pilgrimage routes to check documents and verify intentions. But enforcement was patchy with plenty of loopholes. As long as you rang the right bell and dropped the right coin in the box, few asked questions. Yet even among frauds and show-offs, genuine devotion burned bright. Many pilgrims confessed daily, walked barefoot, or endured extreme discomfort for their souls. Some even carried heavy crosses or whipped themselves along the way. Others walked in silence or vowed to avoid meat, wine, even talking until they reached their sacred goal. The line between very few asked questions. But even among the fakes and show-offs, genuine devotion burned bright. Many pilgrims confessed daily, walked barefoot, or endured extreme discomfort for their souls. Some even carried heavy crosses or whipped themselves on the road. Others walked silently or vowed no meat, no booze, not even a word, until they hit their holy goal. The line between devotion and showboating was razor thin and often trampled by muddy boots and human nature. Because in the end, pilgrimage wasn't about perfection. It was about showing up, limping, sweating, lying about blisters now and then, but still walking the walk. Every pilgrimage eventually ended at a shrine, a tomb, or for the lucky ones, back home. But coming home wasn't always the victorious return many hoped for. First, there was the physical reality. Most pilgrims returned with fewer teeth, fewer coins, and more scars, both literal and figurative. Lost toes, hunchbacks, and weird diseases no village healer could name. You didn't just bring home a badge. You brought back injuries, tendinitis, and the story of a Flemish guy who snored like a prison guard. Then came the expectations. Villages welcomed returning pilgrims with ceremonies. Now you were supposed to be holier, wiser, calmer. Everyone expected you to pray more, sin less, maybe smell like frankincense. Instead, many pilgrims staggered home hungry, grumpy, and more interested in beer than blessings. Some returned disappointed. They'd walked hundreds of miles, kissed saintly bones, wept at altars, but nothing changed. No miracles, no divine voices. Their illnesses stayed. Their guilt lingered. The only thing that felt lighter was their wallet. For these pilgrims, the letdown was worse than any highwayman's club. Yet others came back changed not because of relics or rituals, but because of the road itself. Walking day after day, meeting strangers, seeing far-off lands. It expanded their understanding of the world. Some became storytellers. Some joined monasteries. Others just got way more patient with their noisy neighbors' chickens. The road taught them humility, empathy, and endurance like no sermon ever could. And don't forget bragging rights. Pilgrim badges were worn like armor in the local tavern. A tin scallop shell from Santiago earned you a free drink. A scrap of cloth from Jerusalem. You'd be telling that story till you died. Whether the journey changed your soul or not, it definitely boosted your street cred. Even those who cheated or didn't finish the trip found a weird peace in trying. The effort itself became a devotion. Because in the Middle Ages, coming back from a pilgrimage, changed or not, meant something. You dared to walk the path to heaven and somehow made it back. Though centuries passed and jets replaced blistered feet, the echoes of medieval pilgrimage still color our world. Back then, pilgrimage wasn't just a personal journey. It was a cultural force. Routes like the Camino de Santiago, Via Francigena, and the road to Canterbury helped stitch medieval Europe together. Pilgrims crossed borders, swapped stories, traded dialects, and accidentally laid the foundation for something revolutionary, a shared European identity. Roads improved thanks to pilgrims. Inns and hospitals popped up for them. Villages turned into towns. Towns became cities. Trade followed these pilgrims and often stuck around long after they left. Today, many modern highways still trace the paths thousands of medieval feet once trod. Spiritually, pilgrimage redefined how people understood faith. Before, salvation was locked behind church doors and Latin prayers. But pilgrimage made it tangible. You could walk there. You could suffer for it. You could earn every step of the way. But the legacy isn't just physical or spiritual. It's deeply human. The pilgrimage path became a metaphor for struggle, for transformation, for the painful and sometimes downright ridiculous process of trying to be better. It was never about perfection. It's about movement, intention, showing up messy, flawed, and hopeful. Today, folks still walk those ancient roads. Some do it for health, some for fun, some because they lost something or someone and need time to heal. The scallop shell still decorates backpacks and walking sticks. The innkeepers still welcome hobbling pilgrims. Prayers get whispered in many tongues, but they still echo into the sky over those dusty roads. Even those who never pilgrimaged feel its weight in culture, literature, movies, and even social media journeys where we watch someone try to find themselves by leaving everything behind. Because medieval pilgrimage wasn't about the destination. It was about becoming. The legacy isn't in shrines, but in choosing to keep walking. Even when the road is long, the shoes don't fit, and miracles seem miles away. Because maybe the real relic isn't a saint's bone in a box. The pilgrim is the one who comes home, hurting but still moving forward. In a world without weekend football or celebrity boxing, the medieval tournament was the ultimate spectacle. And nothing got the nobility more excited than receiving an official tournament invite, sealed with wax, written in fancy script, delivered by a horseback messenger. That wasn't just an invite, it was a public challenge. If you were worthy, your honor demanded you show up and get thrown off your horse. Tournaments didn't just happen. They were staged with royal wedding flair and the budget of a mini crusade. Local lords or powerful kings threw banquets to flaunt wealth, attract alliances, and maybe marry off a daughter or two. Many days, sometimes weeks, were dedicated to partying, jousting, melee combat, archery, rituals, and low-level chaos. For knights invited, the stakes were sky high. Tournaments could make or break reputations, often with a few broken bones on the side. It was the moment to show off skill, courage, and fashion sense in front of ladies, lords, and rival knights. One win could mean a marriage proposal, land sponsorship, or at least a few poems praising you from some rich admirer. But this invite wasn't for just anyone. You had to be noble-born, or at least fake it well. Heraldry was inspected, ancestry debated. Nobody wanted a commoner sneaking in with fake badges. That'd be a scandal or worse embarrassment if he won. Preparations kicked off immediately. Armor polished, horses trained, tailors summoned. A knight had to fight well and look the part. Your cloak had to shine. Your family crest visible from 50 paces, and your lance balanced to the ounce. The invite spread alongside gossip about rivalries. Did Sir Baldwin offend Sir Geoffrey's sister last tournament? Was Sir Roland still bitter about the last tournament? Remember, is Sir Roland still bitter about being knocked off by a younger knight with better hair? These scores will be settled with pounding hooves and clashing steel. The moment the wax seal cracks, the heartbeat of the knight speeds up. Because a tournament isn't just a game. It's war, done politely. After the announcement, the real work begins. For knights, that means training. Brutal, non-stop, and sometimes downright crazy training. Because while tournaments come wrapped in ceremony and spectacle, their true nature is organized violence on horseback. And if you're not ready, you won't just lose easily. You'll eat dirt in front of thousands of spectators, and probably embarrass yourself, maybe even a duchess. First up was the joust, the iconic event. Two knights charging straight at each other, aiming to smash each other's pride and ribs. But landing a solid hit wasn't just about going full madman. It took hours of practice. Knights trained against wooden dummies, spinning a shield target on one side and a heavy sandbag on the other. Hit the shield too softly, you failed. Hit off center. The sandbag would spin and smack you right in the face. Great motivation. Balance was everything. You had to aim a 12-pound lance at a moving target while the sandbag spun and slammed into your head. Great motivation. Balance was everything. You had to aim a 12-pound lance at a moving target while galloping on a horse wearing 80 pounds of armor without falling off. Training involved strengthening your core, perfecting timing, and building such a tight bond with your horse that you could basically read each other's minds. A spooked or sluggish horse could ruin your entire strike and your femur. Off the horse, knights fenced with swords, axes, and maces to get ready for close combat. Basically, a group brawl with fewer rules and more injuries. This was the part of the tournament that simulated real battles. Battles could last for hours, with dozens of warriors involved, often ending with dislocated shoulders, broken noses, or nobles fainting and being dragged out of the mud by their guards. And they trained their squires, too. They handled everything, pulling on armor, horse care, handing over weapons mid-fight, and bandaging wounds, with a mix of herbs and sedatives. A good squire could make the difference between glory and humiliation. A bad one might accidentally hand you your ceremonial sword instead of the battle-ready one. Oops. Training was exhausting, dangerous, sometimes deadly, but knights accepted it as part of the code. You didn't just train to win, you trained to survive. Because no matter how romantic the songs were, tournaments weren't about gentle chivalry. They were battlefields with dress codes. Before lances shattered, tournaments became stylish war zones. Knights didn't just appear out of nowhere. They were thoroughly prepared. Everything from their coats to the embroidery on their saddles screamed one thing status. You weren't just a warrior. You were a trusted family brand. Colors, symbols, and outfit choices spoke louder than any victory cheer. The centerpiece of this spectacle was the coat of arms, the medieval version of a resume, Instagram profile, and sports jersey rolled into one. Shields and banners displayed the knight's badge. Lions stood for bravery, crosses for piety, and mythical beasts for those wanting to prove something. Every color, every pattern had meaning. Red meant courage, gold generosity, black sorrow or revenge. Or maybe you just liked how it caught the sunlight. These symbols weren't just for show. They helped identify knights beneath the heavy armor. You could wear a helmet, face visor, and still get lost in the dust of battle. But your emblem told everyone who was getting roasted, and more importantly, whose reputation was rising or crashing in front of the crowd. And oh, the crowd. Tournaments were public theater. Nobles, townsfolk, merchants, and hopeless romantics lined up by the stands, eager to see who looked the most heroic. Knights often hired tailors to design eye-catching cloaks and outfits. Think of it as luxury horse armor. In case you don't know your medieval fashion, bright colors, glittering threads, and intricate embroidery turned the lists into a fashion runway, with iron armor and confidence as the style. But it wasn't just personal branding. It was politics. Your outfit showed your alliances, who you dined with, and who sponsored you. A knight might tie his lady's scarf on his arm, a less than subtle move, but one that showed loyalty at court and social ties. Others flaunted foreign styles to prove they'd fought in far-off lands. Silk from the East spoke volumes about a crusader's prestige. Fur-lined gloves, probably just showing off. Armor wasn't just protection. It was a fashion statement. Beyond function, it was custom-made, often engraved or inlaid with fancy metals. A wealthy knight could ride onto the battlefield, sparkling like a chandelier made of bones, while the poorer knight just hoped his dented helmet wouldn't fall off mid-fight. In the tournament world, looking good wasn't optional. It was strategy. Before the lance came down or the sword was drawn, the tournament kicked off with a ceremony so grand it made royal coronations look like backyard barbecues. This was the grand parade, a slow, flashy march of egos, armor, and heraldry, designed to impress, intimidate, and seduce the crowd. Those knights rode in lines, flags fluttering, horses decked out with fancy designs, and servants sprinting behind like stressed-out assistants. Each knight's name was announced by the herald, sometimes with a cheeky comment like winner of the last 3 tournaments, or the guy who once split a man's helmet in half. Winner of the last 3 tournaments, or the guy who once split a man's helmet in half. Humility was definitely not in the mix. The noble ladies in silk stands watched like medieval talent scouts. The noble lords sized up potential allies or rivals. And among the cheering peasants, bets started flying. Could Sir Geoffrey take down that smug Italian again? Would someone fall off their horse in the opening round? You never knew. And that uncertainty was half the fun. After the parade came the oath-taking. One by one, knights stepped up to the tournament judge, a high-ranking noble or even royalty, and swore to follow knightly rules. That meant no hitting a man who'd lost his helmet, no sneaky backstabs, and absolutely no stabbing an opponent once he was down on the ground. You know, the basics of not being a total lunatic. These oaths weren't just for show. They were public honor statements. Breaking these rules could mean fines, disqualification, or becoming the punchline of a very bad ballad. But let's be honest. While some knights recited every word faithfully, others were already tweaking their vows in their heads. I swear not to trample anyone, unless they insult my horse. Some tournaments spiced up the ceremony. Knights might swear loyalty to a lady, dedicate their performance to a saint, or make personal vows like never retreating or never eating until victorious. Romantic? Absolutely. Reckless? You bet. Usually. The parade and the oath set the stage. They turned knights into characters, rivals into stories, and the arena into a living drama. Because for the medieval crowd, this wasn't just sport. It was a play glorifying violence with a moral message and really expensive costumes. And here's the main event. As soon as the crowd went silent, the trumpets blared, and 2 knights charged full tilt at each other with 12-foot wooden lances. Hoping not to end up medieval rubble, the joust wasn't just the highlight of the tournament. It was legend, splinters, and sometimes skull fractures. The arena, or tilt yard, was split by a long wooden barrier called the tilt, designed to keep horses from crashing head-on both sides. Knights lined up on horseback, each wearing armor like a mobile church. Helmets fastened tight, visors down, lances raised, and then, with a trumpet blast and herald's shout, they charged. What was the goal? Hit the opponent's shield, chest, or helmet. A perfect strike could shatter your lance into a rain of wood chips, win cheers from the crowd, and score points from the judges. Knocking your opponent off their horse was the gold standard. But don't get it twisted. This was dangerous. Sure, lances dulled over time, but dull wood doesn't get soft when it hits your chest at 30 miles per hour. Injuries were common: broken arms, cracked ribs, concussions, and teeth knocked so far away they became relics on both sides. Knights line up on horseback, each clad in armor like a walking cathedral. Helmets tightly fastened, visors down, lances raised, and then, with blaring trumpets and the heralds shout, they charge. The goal: hit your opponent's shield, chest, or helmet. A perfect strike might shatter your lance into a shower of wood splinters, earn cheers from the crowd and points from the judges, knocking your opponent off their horse. That's the gold standard. But don't get it twisted. This is dangerous stuff. Sure, lances can dull, but dull wood doesn't soften the blow. When it crashes into your sternum at 30 miles an hour, broken arms, cracked ribs, concussions, and teeth knocked out so far they become archaeological finds are common. Helmets dented like beer mugs. One unlucky knight got impaled through an ice cave. That accident led to stricter armor regulations. But even with all the risks, knights kept coming back, because jousting was about more than honor. It was about status. Winning could instantly boost your reputation, get you noble sponsorship, women's favors, and even immortalize your name in some poet's tear-soaked ballad. And if you were a landless knight climbing the career ladder, a few key victories could be your ticket to power. But jousting wasn't just about brute force. It was a test of precision, timing, and total horse control. One wrong move, and you're flying off sideways in a cloud of shame and mud. Yet even with the pain, bruises, and the chance of a spleen poke, jousting was the heart and soul of Kiowalik culture. Because, for a true knight, nothing screamed glory louder than throwing yourself off your horse in front of your secret crush. If jousting was the gem of finesse, then melee combat was basically a medieval group brawl with weapons. Think of it as a chaotic slaughter party. Dozens of knights split into two teams, charging at each other on a sprawling battlefield, armed with swords, axes, maces, and that trademark frantic enthusiasm usually reserved for bar fights. Sure, there were rules, but they were more like friendly suggestions, like the advice, try not to kill anyone, more of a casual reminder than a strict rule. This melee was meant to mimic real battlefield conditions, minus the peasants screaming and shouting. Knights fought in formation or solo, on horseback or on foot, usually in rounds that lasted until someone called it quits, or until the last fighter was too beat up to keep going. The goals varied wildly. Sometimes it was just a chaotic free-for-all. Other times, teams battled to capture a flag, a banner, or some keepsake, or to rescue a dummy symbolizing a damsel in distress, all in the name of knightly honor. Remember, not as flashy as jousting, but melee offered knights a different kind of street cred. It was raw power, stamina, and tactical smarts. You could flaunt sword skills, horsemanship, and survival when you're constantly getting attacked by other armored dudes. Awesome. Right? Exhausting and dangerous. Injuries were just part of the package. Cracked helmets, shattered shields, broken bones. Some melees were so brutal, knights got dragged out unconscious or unable to stand. But as long as nobody was trying to die on purpose, it was all part of the game. Servants darted around like firefighters, swapping weapons, pulling fallen knights from the mud, or yanking horses out of the mess. Meanwhile, nobles and ladies chilled in shady stands, sipping wine and cheering for their favorite contenders. Because nothing says romance like watching someone get elbowed in the helmet. For landless knights and young lads, the melee was a golden ticket. If you couldn't win a joust, you could still shine in the chaos. Winners might score coins, armor, or even a noble sponsor. Losing just bruises and a few weeks of painful limping while praying, but in a world obsessed with honor and spectacle. The melee was where you proved your mettle, because nothing says nighttime virtue like beating up your enemy with a stick and looking good doing it, honestly. Part of the reason knights hurt themselves and bruised their pride was glory. But another part, the ladies watching. Tournaments weren't just war games. They were social stages. And knights knew every move could win more than just coins. It could win favor, admiration, or even a strategic marriage proposal. And no part of the tournament was better for flirting and showboating than the moments between bouts. Noble women didn't just sit in the stands, fanning themselves and looking pretty. They were active participants. Many knights dedicated their performances to the women they loved, sometimes tying scarves, veils, or keepsakes from those ladies onto their lances as symbols of devotion. This wasn't just sweet. It was calculated. If the knight performed well, the woman shared the glory. If he took a spectacular fall, at least she wasn't promising exclusivity. Women got prizes too. Wreaths, rings, or kisses on the cheek for the winners. The crowd loved it. These court rituals reinforced the ideal of chivalry, fighting for love, for beauty, for something nobler than your own pride. Sure, having a lady lounging in velvet booths, surrounded by servants and luxury, while you sweat in a metal bucket helped. But love at tournaments wasn't always innocent. Things got spicy. Secret notes exchanged. Nobles gossiped. Some knights made a living seducing noblewomen under the guise of chivalric worship. The church freaked out, but that didn't stop anyone. Then came the poets. Bards traveled from tournament to tournament, turning heroic deeds and romantic disasters into catchy songs. If you won both the joust and a duchess's heart, your name could, and if you fell off your horse trying to impress a countess, you'd still make the ballad, but the crowd would laugh a lot more. In a society where status was everything, being admired by noblewomen could make or break a knight's reputation. A whispered compliment from the right lady could, because in the court of public opinion, love wasn't just a battlefield, it was part of the tournament and gossip central. Some knights made a living charming noblewomen under the guise of chivalry. The church was scandalized, but that didn't stop anyone. Then came the poets. Troubadours hopping from tourney to tourney, turning heroic deeds and romantic disasters into catchy rhymes. If you snagged both a jousting win and a duchess's heart, your name might, and if you fell off your horse while trying to impress a noble lady, well, you'd still make the ballad, but the crowd would laugh a lot more. In a society where status was king, winning a noblewoman's admiration could make or break a knight's rep. Where status was everything, earning the admiration of noblewomen could make or break a knight's reputation. A whispered compliment from the right lady could, because in the court of public opinion, love wasn't just a battlefield, it was part of the tournament itself. Despite all the knightly vows and romance, tournaments were chaotic affairs politically, physically, and morally. Beneath the shiny armor and fluttering banners was a medieval underworld of scandal, cheating, and chaos. Let's start with cheating. Knights had rules: no attacking unarmed opponents, no killing blows, no dirty tricks. But honor strangely vanished when money and fame were on the line. Some sneaky rivals secretly reinforced their lances with metal cores, making them way deadlier and way harder to break. Others messed with armor, ditching padding for speed, or even dulling their opponent's sword before the fight. Classic. If a knight had a grudge, accidental brutal hits weren't exactly rare. Officials tried to keep things civil, with cops patrolling the field, scribes jotting down hits, and sometimes disputes settled by a fancy judge. But bribery, that worked like magic. A well-timed bag of silver could turn a knockout into just a slap on the wrist, especially if the knight was rich, well-connected, or hosting a dinner party that night. Then there were accidents, which were often indistinguishable from cheating. Lances shattered unexpectedly. Helmets flew off. Horses keeled over. Once, a guy got skewered right through his bandages and died on the spot. Another fell so hard he bit his tongue off and was mute for life. This wasn't an exception. It was just part of the risk knights had to swallow. But nothing gets a crowd going like a public scandal. Rivalries got personal. Drunken brawls broke out in the camps after dark. Rumors flew about knights hooking up with noblewomen, stolen trophies, swapped identities, and at least one woman disguised as a knight sneaking into the competition. When she got caught, she was booted from the roster, but not before winning twice and embarrassing half a dozen nobles. Clergy hated all this. They said tournaments encouraged vanity, violence, and sin. They weren't wrong. But no one cared, because nobles loved the drama. The crowds craved the blood, and knights enjoyed playing heroes until their masks cracked. Nobles wanted the spectacle. The people wanted the gore. And the knights, they loved the chance to be heroes until someone's visor shattered. Honestly, beneath all that noble fluff, tournaments were never just about honor. They were a high-stakes game where cheating, bloodshed, and gossip were all included in the price of admission. By the late Middle Ages, tournaments shifted from brutal war drills to grand performances. More theater, less training, more show-off, less danger. What started as a nighttime sparring session became medieval celebrity entertainment, and like all great entertainment, it evolved over time. At first, tournaments were free-for-alls simulating real battles. Knights honed skills they might actually use in war team attacks, dodging arrows, smashing skulls. But as battlefield tactics changed, so did tournaments. Armor got heavier, swords turned ceremonial, and lances dulled. The focus shifted from real warfare to polished spectacle. By the 14th and 15th centuries, tournaments looked more like royal Broadway shows. Fancy costumes, painted shields, custom armor engraved with saints and family crests. Nobles in the stands weren't rooting for survival, they wanted a show. Think WWE. But with iron suits, kings and queens started hosting these events. Less for military training, more for diplomacy. A way to flaunt wealth, build alliances, and impress foreign guests. Take Henry VIII of England. He was obsessed with jousting, especially when he was the one charging in. Until, of course, one wild tilt gave him a head injury that changed his personality forever. Yikes. But when gunpowder hit the battlefield and the chivalric knight era faded, tournaments lost their shine. Guns made armor useless. Heavy weapon attacks became rare. Throwing your cousin off a horse didn't prepare you for cannon fire. Still, the tournament's influence stuck around. It created immortal icons, the romantic knight, the maiden's favor, the shiny armor. It shaped literature from Arthurian legends to Shakespeare's plays. And today, its echo lives on. Renaissance fairs reenact jousts and fantasy novels, packed with sparkly jewels and elaborate tournaments. Whenever a fictional character raises a lance in front of a cheering crowd, you know exactly where that tradition comes from. They're all standing on the medieval tournament's shoulders. It might not top the event calendar anymore, but its legacy is still very much alive. You can't deny it. It mixes violence with honor, chaos with choreography, and turns battlefield brutality into entertainment. Because in the end, medieval tournaments weren't just night training sessions. They were about crafting legends with a splash of blood, a dash of scandal, and a whole lot of showmanship.